Hi guys, and welcome back to another Hearts of Iron 4 short guide. So today we are taking a look at my favorite division templates. I will make two separate guides for tank designs and airplane designs. If you're interested in those, please check the links in description. Also, we are using my most advanced save game for this, and this save is taken from a series I recently completed. If you're curious to see how we got the Roman Empire, you can check my tutorial, and if you're curious to see how we got to complete world domination, you can check the series The Roman Empire versus the World. Now let me say a couple of things before we start. The first one is, I will call this guide my favorite divisions. I will not call it the best divisions, and that is because since the latest patches in Hearts of Iron, especially No Step Back and By Blood Alone, it's hard to talk about a best division template. The combat width depends, or the effectiveness of the combat width depends largely on which kind of terrain you're going to fight on the most. So what I will talk about is the divisions that in my experience work the best overall in my or throughout my campaign. The second thing that I would like to say is also quite important. Now these divisions are inspired, some of them are taken, from two guides, two amazing guides that I found through the Steam community about Hearts of Iron. I will include the links to these guides in description. Please make sure to check them out. They are amazing. These guys made all of the calculations, all of the math to check which division templates are more effective, more efficient, the combat width, all of this stuff. So all I did was reading those guides and then testing the division templates in my game, changing them when I felt like they needed to be changed slightly or to adapt them to my game, to my playstyle. So make sure to check those guides for all of the details about combat width, best terrains, and such. Okay, that being said, I think we can start with the actual divisions. Today I will talk about all of the divisions that I used in my game and that I commonly use when I play Hearts of Iron. Okay, so I will start with my infantry division. This is the basic infantry division that I use throughout my game, but what does it look like when we are in the early game? So most nations start with something like this. If I remember correctly, this is the starting Italian division. So you start with 6, sometimes 9 infantry battalions, and then you usually have a support artillery and engineer company support companies. Okay, now what do I do with this? What I usually do is I increase it to a combat width of 21, and to do that I go with 9 infantry battalions and 1 artillery battalion. And the reason I do that is that 21 is a very balanced combat width. It will perform well in most terrains, and it will perform well in the terrains you fight in the most. That being said, check those guides and use the combat width that is best for your terrain if you know that you're going to fight specifically on one. So if you're going to fight in the mountains, a different combat width will be better. I will talk about it briefly later when we talk about my mountaineer divisions. Now let's talk about the remaining support companies. So as soon as possible I include the support anti-air in these divisions. And that is because it's extremely powerful, especially when you cannot achieve air superiority immediately in the war or over the entire front. This will decrease the effectiveness of enemy close air support airplanes by a lot, so make sure to include a support anti-air company. Support anti-tank is more situational, but if you fight nations like Germany or the United States, which have good tanks, anti-tank benefits your infantry a lot. Finally, I like to add a support rocket artillery to overall increase the soft attack, breakthrough, and defense bonuses. This is particularly good if you use your infantry divisions to attack, which I don't usually do, but just in case, it's better to have it. One more thing that I will say now about the infantry divisions, but applies to all of the other divisions. Some people in the late game like to increase the size. You could double it to keep the same bonuses. You could make it a 42 combat with division, just by simply more or less simply doubling the amount of divisions in it. I don't usually do that because I hate supplies. I always run out of supplies. You will know that if you watched some of my videos. And so I prefer to keep my units smaller so that the supply use is also less. Okay, shortly after making my infantry divisions, I usually make a garrison division. Now the name is a bit misleading because I don't actually use my garrison divisions to garrison forts or coastlines and so on. What I usually use them for is to hold the fronts that I don't intend on pushing. So when I don't plan to push on a certain part of the front, I put one of my garrison divisions there just to hold the front. These are good defensive divisions, but they are terrible offensive divisions. They are very similar to the infantry divisions, the basic ones, but here we only have a combat width of 10, which makes them cheaper and easier to produce in large quantity. The support companies are the same, although in this case some of them are more or less useless. The only important ones I would say are the engineer company and the support anti-air. This is particularly important for the garrison divisions because they are likely to be covering fronts where you're not fighting, so without your airplanes. I left the support artillery only because it was already there when I changed my infantry division. I duplicated my infantry division and I transformed it into a garrison because it was cheaper. And then in the late game, where I had an abundance of resources, I included the anti-tank and the rocket artillery. Okay, next let's talk about my motorized divisions. Now this one looks exactly like the infantry division template that I showed earlier, except it's all motorized. The other difference is I did not include an anti-tank company, but I included a logistics company to reduce the supply use. Now, I like these divisions a lot, these motorized divisions a lot. I use them in the early game where this breakthrough is still decent, in play instead of using my armored divisions. Especially when you play with Italy, producing good tanks early on in the game is difficult, so I like to go with these motorized divisions instead. Later on, when you finally get your armored divisions, I like to put the motorized divisions just behind the tanks and push together with both, because of the very high speed that these motorized divisions have. So if you play that correctly, it's possible to push the enemies with your tanks and then to overrun them and destroy their units with your motorized divisions. Alternatively, you can also use them to rush victory points, a bit like you would do for or with cavalry early in the game. Next, let's talk about the armored divisions. We recently mentioned them, so now let's see how I design my armored divisions. Now, here consider that there are a couple of variants depending on which doctrine you go for. Also consider that the stats you see here are affected by the doctrine we picked, which in this game was mobile warfare. We completely researched the mobile warfare doctrine, so we have pretty good bonuses on these stats already. So this is my end game armored division. In the end game, I go with modern tanks and mechanized infantry. I go for a total of 10 modern tanks and 5 mechanized infantry. Now here the idea is you want as many tanks as possible, but you don't want to drop your organization too low. The minimum, I would say, is 30. Try to keep your organization above 30 and your combat width at 30 as well. So the goal is 30 here, 30 here. Other than that, try to maximize your breakthrough. So depending on the doctrines you have, depending on the tanks you design, this may look a bit different. As for the support companies, what I like to have on these armored divisions is the maintenance company to increase the reliability and lose less tanks to attrition. I also like to have the medium flame tank company. As you can see, it gives some pretty decent bonuses in many terrains. And finally, the logistics company, for the usual reason, I hate supplies, so lower supplies consumption is always better for me. The anti-air can be quite useful too, especially if you use them to push hard into enemy terrains. They may run out of the range of your airplanes, so anti-air can be very beneficial for them. Now, of course, modern tanks are something you unlock very late in the game. What do you do earlier? Well, what I like to do earlier is I like to go for medium tanks. Also, in the early game, you don't usually have access to mechanized infantry, so instead of mechanized infantry, you can use simply motorized infantry. So earlier in the game, your division template may look like this one, as long as the organization is good enough. If it's not good enough, what you do is you remove some tanks and replace them with more motorized infantry. Reducing tanks and increasing motorized infantry, this is usually enough, will increase your organization significantly. The combat width stays the same. Of course, the stats are overall worse, because tanks are better than motorized infantry. Okay, let's briefly talk about the special troops. In my case, I only use Alpini divisions. I almost always play with Italy or Mountaineers in any case. When I play with Germany, I also make Mountaineers, so that's overall my favorite type of special troops. But the rules here can be applied to other types of special troops as well. You can use that for Marines. More or less, you can use it for paratroopers as well. So with special troops, what you want to do is you want to get the combat width that is ideal for the terrain you're going to fight in. Of course, these are mountaineers, so they're going to fight in the mountains, and that's why I gave them a combat width of 25, which is ideal in the mountains. To get that, I increased the amount of mountaineers to 9 battalions, and then I added a couple of artillery and 1 anti-air battalions. This is the ideal to get 25 combat width, in my opinion. As for the support companies, not particularly important, but you always want to go with engineer and support artillery. Anti-air can be beneficial as well, of course. The last two are really situational. I gave them some rocket artillery because I use them to push a bit more often, since in the mountains tanks don't perform very well. These are my actual offensive divisions in the mountains. As for the logistics, the usual thing, I hate supplies. Finally, let me briefly talk about the military police division. This one is mostly used to garrison, it's only used to garrison passively the territories you occupied, so you'd never actually recruit these divisions, you only use them as the occupied territories territory management division. And early in the game, you can just have 1 battalion of cavalry in here. You don't really need anything else. If you already start with a cavalry regiment with your nation, you can keep the default cavalry regiment. The cavalry has good suppression, so that's why they are good with military police, or as military police. Later on in the game, when you can afford it, when you don't know what to do with your army experience anymore, you can increase the amount of cavalry battalions to completely fill the division. You get a combat width of 50, and then at that point you add the military police and start benefiting from that plus 45% suppression bonus. Okay, that would be it for my favorite division templates. Make sure to check the next 2 videos, one about my favorite tank designs, one about my favorite airplane designs. Especially the tank designs are particularly important to make this armory division template work effectively. If you have any questions, feel free to write so in the comments. If you enjoyed this guide, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.